Welcome to this webcast, Dealing with the New Deal. Just how will we survive our disappearing reimbursements? This is a critical subject when you consider how crucial third-party allocations, grants, and especially reimbursements are to the spectrum of community types listed on the screen. Today we tackle that subject with our focus on senior care community types. Although it will ripple into and affect our nation, our states, big cities, small towns, corporations, universities, retirement communities, CCRCs, assisted living and nursing homes, hospitals, and planned unit development. Thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. Hi, I am Bill Whitty, Executive Director of the Vital Nation, and I'm speaking to you today about the post-crash crisis. The crisis has occurred already, and we will be dealing with it for decades, because decades of contributions by the taxpayers of this country were made by a covenant contract with the U.S. government for certain services to be delivered at a future date. Billions of dollars of national safety net service delivery infrastructure has been developed to deliver these promises. Business plans developed around this reality require service delivery facilities that incurred long-term debt to develop. But now the lockbox of government custodial obligations have been looted and are now nearing empty, leaving thousands of businesses and institutions left holding an empty bag with no means to replace it. This will specifically be a crisis for those caring for the elderly, who are well past their earning period and are virtually helpless and no longer able to provide for themselves, having entrusted their future to a government who is no longer reliable and shows no evidence that we should trust it any time in the near future. If we could talk to Uncle Sam about our entitlement programs, our largest unfunded obligation, he might say something like this. Well, it seemed like a good idea back in 1935 when we tried to give help to widows, the unemployed, the disabled, the poor, and all those fatherless children. We really never had a plan for sustainability for the successive decades. We didn't know what our population would be or what the value of gold or the dollar would be sometime way up in the future. And now with people living longer, working only 45 years and then expecting entitlements for another 25 years, and with the value of the dollar dropping, gosh, we just can't do it. And y'all have so many of these programs now. I just don't know what we can do about all of this. There is no more conventional wisdom. The mismanagement and the failure to deal with the debt ceiling, or to solve the problem of how to fund the entitlement promises to America, makes it impossible for anyone to make future plans with any degree of certainty. So what are we to do? Hunker down and stay frozen with anxiety until things straighten out in Washington? Those of us in positions of responsibility have constituents, many of whom are dependent upon the reimbursements, entitlements, and other safety net reimbursement plans that Washington was managing for us, in order for many taxpayers to ultimately survive and stay alive. For most of us, our business plans were based upon the mutual contracts and covenant agreements between the taxpayers, the tax collectors, and Congress, who are then going to funnel it back to the states and individuals as part of the promised caretaking process. But now all bets are off. One of the biggest corporations on the planet, the USA, is bankrupt, and all of us are left holding the bag with our own constituents waiting for their checks and reimbursements so that they can pay us for the goods and services we have promised them in return. But with the future and nature of performance by Washington unpredictable, the old contracts might not be fulfilled, and from now on we will be waiting for their cards to be played as we wait to see the particulars of dealing with this century's New Deal. A brief look at this webcast. To understand the new political, financial, and market dimensions, we have prepared a series of programs, all less than an hour, that you could easily watch over your lunch period, to see an executive summary of where we as a nation stand now, and then we will share some ideas and options to consider when dealing with the New Deal. We will begin by defining the reason for our mission, and thus the reason for this webcast. and then we will illustrate the need by sharing financial statistics charts that represent states and towns. From there we will share our solution vision of self-responsibility, especially for our own health care, which by necessity will be required for us to survive and thrive. Next, we will chart the potential that lies within each human being to become healthier individuals, which would allow us to become healthier as a nation as well. We will then take a brief look at the current unfunded latent cost liability that our nation is facing, as well as the demographic patterns that are at the root of the national problem. And using a chart on cohort succession, we will show you the stats of each cohort generation so that we can better understand the cycles of population growth and decline. Then in the coming age wave data, it will guide us as to when we can expect wage inflation, which will even further increase our cost of living and of health care as well. We will then discuss the paradox which explains why Congress is paralyzed with conflicts over illegal immigration relative to our population demography dilemma. Then we will turn to PBS's Frontline Telecast summary and their take on the boomer crisis that will accompany what they hoped would be their future retirement. Then we will have to look at the strategic demographic planning to show why we have to adjust our financial planning to meet the future realities, providing sustainability for our communities and business plans. And finally, we will look at our aging timeline, which outlines the general life experience patterns that we all must face. All of this condensed in less than 60 minutes in Chapter 104 of Dealing with the New Deal. The Vital Nation, creators of the VitalLife community concept, presents this show to examine what we feel will be the greatest threat or impact to institutions, cities, and senior care organizations that are infrastructure and facilities based. Many, if not most of them, are often funded with bonds or other long-term debt instruments based on demographic and reimbursement assumptions that are now no longer valid. For most, they are well into the term of their debt obligation, but now the revenues for which they depended are going to be slowly shut off, especially from the federal revenue spigot. If this is true for you, as it is for most all enterprises, then we each have to develop a post-crash business model, at least for the next new decade. This is a critical subject when you consider how crucial third-party allocations, grants, and especially reimbursements are to the spectrum of community types listed on the screen. Today we tackle that subject with our focus on senior care community types. As in the triage of all types of communities, they are the most vulnerable, although it will ripple into and affect each of the community types listed on this screen. We think everybody watching will receive new and precise insights as to what lies ahead. We have a national crisis that is more dangerous than the Depression of 1929. It's a threat bigger than the armed forces of the Soviet Union, China, or all of the terrorists combined, even with the major oil embargo on top of all of that. Every man, woman, and child will be affected permanently, and we have just begun to realize the dawning of that truth as a nation during this first quarter of this year, 2011. Whether you are involved in national government, state government, big cities or small towns, corporations or universities, you are a community. Retirement communities, CCRCs, assisted living facilities, nursing homes, hospitals, and development communities are all a part of our culture of aggregated communities. Our message and solutions could be very instrumental in your next decade as we try to negotiate our way safely through this perilous crisis. Just how bad is this crisis? Let's see what the AARP reported in their May 2011 bulletin. We're going to start with the states, and later we will look at the federal budget in order to realize the devastating impact on the entitlement programs. How bad is the crisis for the states? To answer that question, let's look at some of the details in the article written by Marcia Mercer. This graph shows the projected deficits as a percentage of budgets for each of the 50 states in fiscal 2012. 44 states and the District of Columbia are projecting $122 billion in budget shortfalls for fiscal 2012, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Nevada is projected to have a 45.2% shortfall, California 29.3%, and Texas 31.5%, just to look at 3 examples. A brief look now at the budget process as practiced by the average states, as reported by the AARP through NASBO, or the National Association of State Budget Officers. Most states have the governor present a budget to the legislature, and between the 2 branches they have to pass a balanced budget, as they cannot go into debt the way that the feds do. When their revenues drop, they must cut or slash their spending, which results in state employee layoffs, program cuts, or elimination. The only way to avoid this is to go to their contingency reserves, if they have any, or to raise taxes, which is almost always unpopular in a down economy, as you can imagine, because most taxpayers are already struggling. And this usually results in safety net programs that benefit the poor and vulnerable being reduced dramatically or cut altogether. In either way, this wreaks havoc in the lives of their constituents. As you can see here, the states almost all rely on the feds for 30% of their annual revenues, and we all know now that the feds are bankrupt. We would like to suggest just what America's next culture change product will have to be. It's free from the Vital Nation, which is not for profit, here to serve America. Changes. The problem with changes for the better is that, well, they are changes. And many of us have our own rhythms of daily living, or a kinder word would be our own inertia. We are reluctant to change at all. That's why the best way to eat an elephant is 1 bite at a time. And if you accept that, it will happen eventually. And eventually is better than never if you're starving. That's why the VitaLife Community Program is all about saving America 1 minute at a time. Now, you'll give a minute, won't you, to save your own life? And if you give 1, 2 is easier, isn't it? And if it's fun and saves you money, not to mention your life, you just might pursue it with every minute of your life. Now, here's why you should. The VitaLife Community is a wellness-based social lifestyle program with a goal to reduce the rate of aging for each of us, providing strategies and tactics that we can employ, and therefore reduce the unfunded liability costs for our future. The metaphor personalities that we have chosen to represent our American culture are clones. 2 gals named Dorothy. There's Dorothy 1 and Dorothy 2. And they each represent opposing lifestyle choices. 1 lives a life fighting to maintain equilibrium in order to be able to engage, while the other enjoys a vital life, fully engaged and able to afford the life that she lives. Life quality is all about avoiding morbidity, so that one can be productive, engaging, socially active, and constantly in vital motion. The stakes are high, as the next graph will show. The VitaLife community is a purpose-driven community, and our mission is keeping people vital while they're alive. We need to recognize that as we age, we will experience each of the 4 F's of fun, function, frailty, and failure. And at times we will experience more than one of those conditions. It is also important to know that the cost of living in each of these successive zones increases exponentially. Graphically, let's represent the 2 extremes of the Dorothy's choices. It is either Dorothy 1, represented by the red line, which is a life without a vital purpose or plan, which results in incessant chronic illness and disease, inability to socialize, or to be part of a productive workforce or family unit, and headed for personal bankruptcy as she ages and becomes a dependent. Or the blue line, which represents Vital Dorothy 2. She lives a vital life in a very productive way, active in her family, her neighborhood, and city, and she enjoys life with discretionary funds for personal growth, instead of having to squander them on morbidity intercession. There is a tremendous amount of measurable life potential value expressed between those two lines, which represent a variance of up to $1 million or more in cost per person, and billions of dollars of potential savings there in healthcare costs for this nation and for those who pay the taxes supporting those programs. The Vital Life community concept is broad, and while it must focus on the motivation and responsibility of the individual can only truly achieve their own maximum potential within this support system residing within a purpose-driven Vital Life host community. Now one might rightfully ask, what's in it for the community to take on this responsibility? Well, one of the greatest contributors to fiscal collapse in all communities are unfunded liabilities of health and retirement benefits that cannot nor will ever be fulfilled for the community's employees. The Vital Life Community Program, if overlaid in the community's operations planning, can save the individual workforce literally tens of millions of dollars through prevention, not to mention offering a dynamic lifestyle that will attract both new employees and, more importantly, new residents into that community. This generates a larger tax base, which means more revenues, and a means of a workout by providing prevention programs that will reduce unnecessary overhead spending in the long run. Remember, unfunded entitlement programs will siphon off dollars that need to go towards continuing and maintaining and upgrading public infrastructure. These prevention and life quality programs should be thought of as public infrastructure that are just as important as roads, water, and sewer. It's all about total life quality, not just health and welfare. Using the same graph, let's portray the relationship between towns with Vital Life performance goals versus ones where a life of apathy would just naturally occur. Let's allow it to also express a strategy of both revenue conservation as well as revenue creation. After all, our mission is a sustainable community. At the top of our graph, we see the chronological timeline of a town in 25-year increments. How often have we seen a dynamic town that was a place to be, only to go back in 30 years and see instead the skeletal bones of its former being? This instantly tells us that a classic morbidity has taken place. Towns that have allowed themselves to decline because they had no forward-thinking strategies to support their sustainability often shrink in difficult times, never to be associated as a place to live evermore. If we take a look at the chart above, wherein we see two pathways, one of recovery and growth, the other of continuing degradation and failure, we can readily see the difference between the two resulting outcomes. Clearly, the town with a strategic plan, based on a vital life, the one that painted in green, can recover and be sustainable, whereas the town without a vital plan, the one that painted in red, continues its decay. The reactionary town that stands for nothing will become nothing, as it quickly drains away its lifeblood, its revenues. The visionary Vital Life town will recover by creating jobs and revenues. Every community must have as its goal sustainability. Financial sustainability supports all the other environmental initiatives and the required infrastructure. Well, let's follow the money trail so that we can truly understand what's ahead of us. It's been a wild ride and a breathtaking chase. But in this age of information, we can finally all follow the money together. And then I think that you will understand the next New Deal. We can all make decisions if we know what the rules of the game are and the cards that we have to deal with. But for years, all we've heard are political ranting, but seldom do we ever get to see all of the cards and hear a balanced debate. So let's begin with a look at the cards that count, with real facts, real cards, with verifiable data. These are our cards, and this is the New Deal. Federal spending per household is skyrocketing. The federal government is spending more on a per-household basis than ever before. Since 1965, taxes and spending have been rising. Federal revenues, that's our tax payments, have dropped recently, as one might expect, due to the economic recession. But in spite of that, congressional spending has reached a record high. Now, when federal spending grows faster than people's paychecks, the government's burden on taxpayers becomes greater. Over the past few decades, middle-income Americans' earnings have risen 29%, see the lower right-hand corner of the chart, while spending has increased, look at the upper right-hand corner, while congressional spending has increased 242%. Can we repeat that? 242%. This, ladies and gentlemen, could be the entire show by itself. Congress has been spending wildly and recklessly without regard to the consequences on the American public. And why shouldn't they? They don't have to adhere to the same rules that you and I do. In the past, wars and the Great Depression contributed to rapid but temporary increases in the national debt. Over the next few decades, runaway spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid will drive the debt to unsustainable levels. Recent budget deficits have reached unprecedented levels, but the future will be much worse unless entitlements are reformed and spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are managed properly. They will drive the deficits to unsustainable levels. As the national debt grows, interest payments will consume more and more of the federal budget. Under the President's budget, the national debt would nearly double, and real net interest costs would quadruple over the next decade. If future taxes are held at the historical average, spending on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security will consume all revenues by 2052. Because entitlement spending is funded on autopilot, no revenue will be left to pay for other government spending, including constitutional functions such as defense. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid spending will soar as 78 million baby boomers retire and their health care costs climb. Medicaid spending will more than double, and Medicare spending will more than triple. The nation cannot afford Medicare and Social Security benefits that have been promised to future retirees. These long-term unfunded obligations dwarf spending on other expensive government programs, including the Troubled Asset Relief Program, known as TARP, and the 2009 Economic Stimulus Bill, and they vastly outweigh the entire national debt. Spending cuts are often considered as a way to pay for unaffordable Social Security and Medicare benefits. But annual spending on entitlements is massive compared to other programs, including defense. Congress is left with no other solution. Entitlements must be reformed and drastically reduced to become affordable. To summarize, no matter how we slice it and dice it, no matter whether we blame the Democrats or the Republicans, the unvarnished truth is that each Congress successively has raided the lockbox and wistfully passed the debt retirement and entitlement problems to successive Congresses. They promised what they felt was required to get them elected and reelected, then failed to act responsibly to fix the problem, so that they could return yet for another term. None of these initiatives listed will do the job, either individually or bundled together. The only alternative to avoid utter collapse of our government, both federally and state, is to come clean and tell the constituents the bad news, that we will have to settle our promises for a few cents on the dollar. And even that would be the best news. Then we would somehow have to make the best of it individually. And with any luck, God willing, we would do it together. A handful of modern Paul Reveres have been riding throughout each hamlet and city recently, telling us that the enemy was coming. But we ignored the warning, because the enemy he was identifying was us, and our childlike dependency, thinking that there was an easy way out, instead of taking personal responsibility. Now at some time, and hopefully soon, a brave American will have to stand before us, and like Washington, Lincoln, Wilson, Roosevelt, Churchill, Kennedy, and Reagan, we will hear sobering news that will stun us, and we will be quiet and we will listen, For we will finally know that we are hearing the truth, that what we face is a battle as difficult as a war, which will require sacrifice and the ultimate commitment if we are to survive it. We are seeing the specter of reality in the news as the stories come in from Wisconsin, Egypt, Libya, and the Middle East. This is the sad news that we will face. But in this series, Dealing with the New Deal, we have a solution, sponsored by the Vital Nation, that will bring us together again in a more simple life, using traditional American values of working with each other for the common good. It is called the Vital Life Community, and it will give you hope, cost you nothing, and possibly give you back your vital life.
Here's a map looking at a statistical bar chart looking at 4 different cohort generations running with the birth rates from 1908 to 1983. And the critical information from this chart is that the GIs, who are now kind of disappearing, those World War II heroes, there are very few of them left, and they will be gone from the face of this earth in another 4 or 5 years. A giant infrastructure has emerged to fund and to support and to entertain the retirement needs of these 55 million GIs and their families. And it's huge. It's a huge business. But the problem is that the following generation, my generation, the silent generation, we're only 49 million. We're 6 million less than GIs. And not only that, we are far less able to afford late-age care or retirement or any of the other niceties that retirement provided for the GIs. It's been said that my generation and the boomers won't have any retirement, that we're going to have to work until we're 80 or until we drop. So what happens to this huge infrastructure that's in place serving the GIs, again, that have long-term debt notes? What's going to happen to them when this next generation can't fulfill the obligation that the Ponzi scheme was depending upon? But wait a minute. Good news. We have 76 million boomers following them, and that's what we've all been waiting for, isn't it? 76 million people coming in that are going to be needing goods and services, and ultimately that will be retiring and that will need late-age facilities and services, and that infrastructure maybe will be saved by them if it can survive long enough. But maybe that's not so good either. Well, let's take a look at statistics. Let's take a look at the coming age wave. Specifically, let's look at the boomers' birth rates and the ages that they're going to reach at certain milestones. They will be basically, the first wave will be 80 in 2026, and that's when they're going to need most of the late-age care. And then we'll have succeeding boomers also following in their steps. But 2026, if this is 2010, that's 16 years from now. And if they are not engaged in any late-age services or have the ability to pay for any late-age services, then that means there's a 16-year gap before this giant age wave that the economy was depending upon. It's going to be 16 years before that occurs, at best. And if that's the case, then we've got to ask ourselves, how is this massive infrastructure going to survive a 16-year gap without reimbursements or any income coming in? We know what happened to the oil business when suddenly oil became cheaper in the Middle East. Our infrastructure almost disappeared, and if oil was discovered today, there's no way we could mobilize and get back into the race. So we won't have the infrastructure that we need in 2026. It's almost guaranteed. Let's take a look at some more statistics that are pretty important for us to understand. It's not only the 16-year gap that we're worried about, but we're also worried about the gap between the 76 million boomers and the 66 million Generation Xers. Because what we have is a disparity of 10 million, a 10 million shortfall. Well, why is that a critical issue? I mean, after all, 10 million less mouths to feed, right? Well, it's 10 million less, but it poses a very severe problem. We have 10 million less individuals who are not enough at all, to provide the goods and services and to provide the influence that we need to have in our country to provide the higher income workers to fund the future entitlement programs, or the buyers for the expensive homes of the retiring boomers who haven't saved, or there won't be enough skilled caregivers to take care of this huge population when they age. And we also need unskilled workers to take the lesser paying jobs that are required to support the boomers, and we just won't have enough. What happens when we have a few people and hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs? It's going to be a market for those who are looking for jobs. At least we can say that the X-Gens are going to be in great shape for job opportunities because there will be wage inflation. They will be able to almost name their price. So that's this other issue that we have because of this whipsaw up and down demography variation we have between the GIs, the silents, the baby boomers, and the X-Gens. But isn't there a question that's always been nagging at you, that you've always wondered about? Let's take a sidebar and find out what this is all about. What is it about the illegals that keep crossing the borders, who get services and protection, and they get benefits that actual citizens of America in the middle class can't obtain? Why are we providing this lure and encouraging them to break the law and do illegal things? I mean, what's this all about? And more than that, how do we understand when we've got a government on the left side of the aisle and the right side of the aisle and they both agree on something? Well, that's never heard of in America. And don't we know that when they both agree and it doesn't make sense, that there's something else afoot? I know some people think the Republicans want the money for their businesses and the Democrats want the voters, but they both want enough population to fund the entitlement programs and keep America solvent. Alan Greenspan said that if we don't open up our immigration rules significantly, we're going to have tremendous inflationary pressures caused by a tight labor market. And what they were hoping is that those illegals crossing the border would at least fill in the gap and equal the boomer population. And they were hoping to get maybe 60 million, maybe 66 million in. But what's happened recently, with the economy falling, we've had some of these illegals fleeing back across the border in a reverse migration program. So that poses a problem. So how are we going to make up the difference between the 66 million X-Gens and the boomers? Well, if only all these people weren't going to be retiring all at one time, and if we could just find 5 million more illegals to fill that gap, or better yet, if we could just take 5 million older Americans and make them younger next year, we'd have a chance, wouldn't we? Take a look at the chart. If we could slide these people over into this next cohort generation, the disparity wouldn't be so great. So why don't we just do that? If we could make it so that 10 million more Americans suddenly were younger next year and didn't want to or have to retire, then our country would be in a lot better shape, wouldn't it? Well, what happens if we can't adjust those demographics virtually? Let's say that would be a great idea, and some people say that can't happen. Well, I advise you to go back into 2006, about May I believe it is, Frontline's show called Can You Afford to Retire? And right now, let's just take about 90 seconds of it, and let's let PBS's Frontline spell it out for us.
Baby boomers will be facing a very different kind of retirement life than their parents. The research shows that they might be able to keep the same amount of income, relative to what they earned. So the middle class baby boomer may also maintain their middle class lifestyle into retirement, but there's one big difference. The only way they can do it is if they work. The only source of income to retirees, and I understand the irony in what I'm just going to say, the only increasing source of income to retirees is from work.
Working longer.
Working longer. So what is the meaning of the word retirement if the only way you can live in retirement is to work? The answer is there is no meaning to retirement anymore. We're now shifting from lifetime pensions to lifetime work. It's the end of retirement.
So there you have it. The average baby boomer will run out of savings, they predict, 7 to 10 years before they run out of life. This means they will have to keep on working until they're at least 85. Our national imperative, therefore, is wellness. We must stay well longer. This means there's a new mandate for Americans. No retirement, working 20 more years than they had expected. And if it wasn't a shock, this really wouldn't be so bad. But it is a shock to the system, and it breaks just about every planning mandate and business plan that's been established in America. This means a new mandate, though, for those developers and those people who are providing goods and services, keeping Americans' aging workforce healthy until age 85 and beyond. Let's talk now about the crisis triad, and that consists of the market, the economy, and the developers, those people who will develop new solutions to help us solve emerging problems. First, the market. The most predictable market is one based on predictable need, and that need is low-cost health care. Relative to the economy, whatever we do, we have to do it with funds that are now available, and we know that they are very limited. So finally, the conclusion is that there will have to be smaller capital projects, uniquely created and funded, and they must seek to serve a larger affinity market segment. We'll put all this together for you in some of the subsequent chapters of this presentation. Normally, when we are considering serving a certain market sector in a given geophysical area, we evaluate the prospective market by identifying the service need of those who are age and income qualified for our respective service menu. Quite often, we will evaluate prospective candidates by examining population segments within discrete zip code districts. It is not uncommon that we will be required to aggregate many zip codes in order to find the needed qualified age and income population that is large enough, such that with given penetration rates, we will then have enough market prospects to ensure that our business plan can endure. So, in order to make a point, we are going to simplify the process and use, as an example, just one of the many zip codes in the hypothetical area that we might be interested in, and use their numbers to reflect what we might expect in the aggregated package. If we looked within a zip code in any town USA and limited our market to the cohort generation known as the silent generation, we may find a statistical qualified age and income group that looks like this chart. In our marketing target, the red center circle depicts those aged 85 to 110, in which we would find 22 age and income qualified candidates. For those in the orange circle with ages ranging from 80 to 84, we would find 51 candidates, and for those in the green circle in the age range of 75 to 79, we might find 98 age and income qualified people. Altogether, this would total, for assisted living or skilled care nursing facility candidates, a total of 171 people at any given time in this small zip code area within a discrete time period that would be age and income qualified and thus our target audience. Let's suppose in 2006 an organization researched the potential boomer demographics for that same zip code 12 years out and discovered it may look like this. Quite attractive, with 33 persons in the age 85 to 110-year-old category, 76 persons in the 80 to 84 category, and 160 persons in the 75 to 79 category, altogether totaling 269 potential age and income qualified prospects. So they established their business plan, began the development process, designed and built the appropriate facilities, and then mortgaged them with a 30-year debt instrument. Let's assume the project was completed and opened for business in 2010, and sadly they realized that the boomer market reality had changed dramatically, but for the worse. Instead of three categories having 33, 76, and 160 prospective residents respectively, to their horror they realized at best they would be able to find only 12, 26, and 45 new residential candidates respectively, for a total of only 86, as opposed to the 269 residents their business plan was based upon, and upon which their 30-year note was secured. Now I'm going to insert a graphic I've used in other longer presentations next, but I've tried to take a 10-minute slide of information and compress it into 2 minutes. So pay very close attention. This is quite important. So what should be our strategy in the years ahead? Well, we might suspect that if our existing business plan that was dependent upon a demographic of age and income qualified people whose ages ranged between 75 and 110, that it may prove to be a disaster if we continue on with our original game plan, especially if we still have anywhere from 5 to 25 years left in our debt obligations. Now let's try something unique. Let's look at our qualified age and income prospects, not just in a slice of time, but over the timeline of our debt obligation, to see what the risk might be given today's conditions relative to the financial capabilities of our traditional cohort segments in the years ahead. Note on the chart the labels over the 3 columns of cohort prospect numbers. We have the silent column and 2 additional columns representing the boomer potential we were planning on and the most likely boomer reality we will actually experience. In these diagrams, we see a picture that is dramatically different from what may have been the baseline expectations for many projects conceived and delivered prior to the financial crash we have recently experienced. Let's assume that the charts below represent a 30-year timeline, with each level representing our potential market groups and their ability to afford our services. We have those who have discretionary income and retirement funds, as well as entitlements. Then at the next level, we have those who have some investments, but have relied upon entitlements and reimbursements for their late age. And then finally, at the lower level, we have people with no investments or discretionary income, and they don't trust their entitlements. Now we see the blue line, and that represents our market expectations, and the yellow line that charts the actual reality that may be more accurate in the days ahead. Well, there it is, the possible reality for us ahead. Now we must adjust our strategies accordingly. Let's take that same zip code that we used earlier and see what happens when we manage to attract a wider range of age groups, starting with ages 65 to 110. This increases our potential market base from 171 to 594 potential customers. Well, that's hopeful and very exciting, but we can't just change our public policy on entry age and expect things to get better. The reason is that by expanding the age demography, we have now crossed into a territory of 2 different drivers as to why people might make a change from the home that they otherwise would have liked to age in place in. The difference is that one group is driven by need or fear, while the younger group has always made their decisions based on lifestyle and desire, desire being extremely powerful. This is going to require rethinking the nature of our business assumptions and changing from one that's exclusively focusing on care and instead creating what I would suggest should be a preventative, holistic lifestyle environment that simply offers concierge care as needed by individuals as they age throughout their later years. Well, I'll bet you know what's coming next. If adding 2 more desire-driven cohort age groups are good, then 3 has to be better. And right you are, as we now increase our market potential from 594 to 972 age and income qualified prospective residents. But as you might guess, as we lower our entry age to 55, we are once again requiring a new dimension of lifestyle to be added to our menu if we are to succeed. I hope what we've accomplished here in these diagrams is to make it dramatically clear that just working harder and cutting costs so deeply that it cuts into the meat and bone of the initial business plan is not going to be enough. Propping up old business plans that were based upon outdated assumptions that are no longer valid is not a strategy today or any time in the future. We simply have to expand our market reach so that we can accomplish needed penetration and sustainability. This will require us to change the construct of our original business plan, as well as adding new dimensions that are market responsive, and I will repeat that, as well as adding new dimensions that are market responsive. To use the fast food industry as a metaphor, compare the original menu of McDonald's in both variety of food types as well as the numbers of total offerings to today's offerings. It is well understood in business strategic planning that products and services must shift with the evolving market needs if business sustainably is desired. And back to our example, from where we started out, dramatically adjusting our market plans could broaden our program and increase our capture potential from 173 to 972 potential prospects. So therefore, here we have it, the mathematical case for dramatically adjusting our market plans. So let's summarize. Consideration number 1, since there will be fewer age and income prospects in each age group, it might be wise to find the broadest market appeal to the largest viable market sector available if we want to ensure success and sustainability instead of just possible survival. Of all of the market segments, those who are most concerned about their health and healthcare costs may be the most motivated to seek new products and services. This sector, demographically, will be the aging population. Let's look at a graph that generally traces the passages of our U.S. population. If we look at the aging timeline, we will find that we go through a 4-step process as we age. I call it the 4 F's, and it's been identified by other researchers as fun, function, frailty, and failure. If you look on the left side of the chart, you will see the aging timeline, what I call our health and wellness continuum. At every period during our lifetime, we will be involved in one or more of these sectors. We can be having fun and yet starting to realize functionality problems. We can have functionality problems and then start to realize that we're frail and that we could be severely injured if we fall. We can also be frail and then start to simply have our systems shut down. Very generally, if we take a look at the graph, we see that we start to cross over from the fun and function line at about age 50. And somewhere around 65 to 75, we cross dramatically from the function to frailty timeline. And then it's anybody's guess, depending on lifestyle and the genome code, at what time we will have our end-of-life experience. So this is the aging timeline, and it's the almost inevitable life path that we will all experience. But it does not have to be the case if we can find and live in the right community type. In our next chapter, we examine the evolution of community types and outline the specifications for a new community product type as we do a brief SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of our development and adult aging market providers.
To summarize this webcast, we began by defining the reason for our mission, and thus the reason for this webcast. We illustrated the need as defined by the illustrative financial statistics charts that represent many of our states and towns. From there, we shared our solution vision to redirect our seemingly life-threatening course that our nation is now pursuing. Next, we charted the potential that lies within each human being to become healthier individuals, which would then allow us to become healthier as a nation as well. Next, we identified the current unfunded latent cost liability that our nation is facing, as well as the roller coaster demographic patterns that are the root of our problem. Using the chart on cohort succession, we showed the demography of each cohort generation so that we could better understand the cycles of population growth and decline. Then the age wave was briefly examined, focusing on why we would have wage inflation, thus even further increasing our cost of living and health care. We then described a paradox that revealed why Congress is paralyzed with conflicts over illegal immigration relative to our population demography dilemma. And we used Frontline's telecast summary indicating that the boomers would be running out of money when they most need it, in the care portion of their lives. And next was strategic demographic planning. why we have to adjust our strategic financial planning to meet future realities and providing sustainability for our communities. And finally, we looked at the aging timeline, which outlines the general life experience patterns that we all must face. When you join us in the next chapter 2, we're going to take a look at the need for we the people to belong to and to be active in a community if we are to thrive. To the extent that we share parallel priorities, we can agree to key goals that will shape our community. Thus we become, by charter or agreement, an affinity community, or as we call it, a purpose-driven community. There are all types of categories of communities which were all formed or which evolved to provide certain environmental and psychosocial benefits for those who joined them. We will examine the basic characteristic of community types and suggest a new type that will evolve to meet emerging needs. Our proposal for a new type of community not only solves new needs, but it can readily be morphed into a version of an existing community type, which is purpose-driven, the PACE community. These are existing communities with a purpose, and they are held accountable for measurable community benefits and performance. Residents in existing communities are not as mobile as they used to be if they own their own home, and we will look at the impact that the crash of '08 had on homeowners and the psychometrics they are dealing with as they try to decide what types of communities and where will be in their best interests in the coming years. In order for all of us to make informed decisions, we need to have an idea as to what the future has in store for us. And while nobody can foretell the future, there are demographic indicators and markers that can provide us a basis of some of the key performance, and they are fairly predictable to help us render better life choice decisions. The fastest growing segment of the U.S. population is the late aging population, many of whom live in affinity communities, often associated with the now inappropriate word retirement. These communities have either evolved or have been developed, and the motive of their developer-operators dramatically impacts the financial health and sustainability of these special communities. The Vital Nation looks at facts and offers a new idea based on current and predictable future needs of our population. It is called the Vital Life Community, one that is purpose-driven, which focuses on recreating new virtual family groups, increasing the levels of socialization in an atmosphere of celebration, all the while promoting wellness in mind, body, and spirit. In 2008, the Vital Nation sponsored a symposium offering the postulate that we could reverse our aging process by changing lifestyle if living within a purpose-driven wellness community. The key is to understand what aging actually is, so that we will be eager to learn the technique required to take better control of that which we call ourself, or our life. And finally, if we can accomplish this feat, having better control of our lives regarding how and how fast we will age, that knowledge combined with new knowledge regarding the Vital Life Community Program will enable us to provide guidelines and protocols showing us how we can turn research, philosophy, and theory into our own personal reality. For more information on this webcast, including footnotes, credits, and resources, as well as instructions regarding how you can receive access to view more of these chapters, especially Chapter 2, go to our website at www.vitalnation, that's VITALNATION, all one word, vitalnation.org, and click on Lunch and Learn, Dealing with the New Deal. This is Bill Whitty saying, that's all for now. So long.